Hello, beautiful people. Before we get into today's episode, I want to tell you or perhaps remind you that I have a newsletter called Tuesday Treasure. You can find that at DannyMoreno.com/Tuesday. If you would like to sign up, I talk about the coolest things I find every week, and I send that out on Tuesday. So if you'd like that, you can find that at DannyMoreno.com/Tuesday. Now, for today's episode, we have Ryan Stevens, and this was a really awesome conversation. We spoke about how we started the conversation off about being weird and why that is such an important thing. And then we went to topics like how he found his wife and what type of values that he's raising his children with. So overall, thought it was a really awesome conversation around family and writing and online stuff. So if you enjoy it, let me know on Twitter at HeyDannyMiranda. I love your feedback, and I would love to hear what you have to say about this episode. Without further ado, let's get to it.
Interesting people, thought-provoking conversations, nutrition for your brain. Journey through the minds of the world's top performers and discover what it really takes to achieve your highest version. This is the Danny Miranda Podcast.
So, I figured we'd start things off with your most recent YouTube video because I was going through this video and I just found it to be so true. And what you talked about was being weird and the importance of a high performer being weird. So I'd love for you to start this conversation off with just a little bit about that.
I wonder if I'm just trying to validate for myself the fact that I'm a little bit weird, as my wife would certainly tell you or attest to. But I just think that the people that I'm most fascinated by, the people that I think do really cool things and change society in really interesting ways, are people that certainly beat a little bit to their own drum. You can look at people like Elon Musk, for example. That guy is objectively very weird, and he's doing some really amazing and cool things. And I think that's true of a lot of thought leaders, if you will. They just think about the world differently. And so I think that was kind of my intent, is that it's okay to embrace that. And I think a lot of people try to round off the weird edges so that they fit in and conform with society, because we have this intense longing to fit in, I think. And I think we would all do better to just embrace our weirdness. And that's the power of the internet, is it's so big and it connects you to so many people that you can be weird and you can still attract your audience and your niche of people that find what you like. And I think the inspiration for that video was a good friend of mine. All of my friends, I always joke, are the same person. They're all this cocky, alpha male-ish baseball player, because I played baseball in high school and college, and so that's where most of my good friends come from. And Brad played with me in high school, but he was just very different from the rest of us in that he kind of beat to his own drum. He and his wife now do these bizarre cuts of death scenes from movies and things, and they just do things that are really different. And I just find it fascinating and interesting. And what I love most about it is that, if anybody told him that he was weird or whatever, he would just shrug and be like, yeah, okay, cool. I'm doing what I like to do. And so I really appreciate that about him.
Yeah, man. It's really interesting too, because you're fighting evolution and you're fighting the programming that's in your mind, in the sense of, let's rewind 10,000 years. If you were in a tribe and the tribe didn't like you, you are then going to be excluded from that tribe. Today, it's like you can almost create your own tribe on the internet. And it's just a really fascinating way to look about it. And you have to flip your own mental programming to really succeed. A lot of people do. Brad clearly doesn't. Brad maybe is just hardwired into him to be weird, but that's very cool and very inspiring too, because I think we need to embrace that, just like you said.
Yeah, I love the comparison to the tribes, because I think, so much of what we do nowadays It really depends. Some of it, I think there's 10,000 years of stuff hardwired into us that we probably should think about and adhere to, and maybe we can talk about a few of those. But to your point, this is the opposite. This is an opportunity where, because of technology, because of the way we've progressed, we can be weird and we can create our own tribes. I think there's merit in kind of evaluating the fact that we have however many years of chromosomal DNA programmed into us. And, I think nowadays we do a lot of things like eating processed food, for example, that are inherently the antithesis of what we've been doing for 10,000 years. And maybe in that respect, we should go back to what our ancestors were doing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. To change directions a little bit, you've been writing online, quote unquote, being weird online since 2008. And that's a long time for someone like me, right? I'm 25 years old, so 2008 is half my life basically. And talk to me about what it was like to write a blog or start a blog starting in 2008.
And I think it was better. The world was just smaller. There were less people doing blogs, and there was also much less competition with social media. Twitter was barely a thing. Facebook was mostly still colleges, and you can read about that, but you didn't come up with that. When I was so excited when I was in college and my little Division III college finally got Facebook, that the big schools had for 2 years because it hadn't rolled out to our little school yet. So I remember that excitement. So there was just much less things competing for your attention back then. And so the communities around blogs, there are exceptions to rules now, but back then I just loved the little community. Anytime you can go back and look at some of my early posts in 2008, 2009, and there would be like 50 comments. And so that's one of the things I loved about blogging back then and writing back then is when I put those thoughts into the world, it wasn't that they were necessarily this like clear cognitive thing that I had thought through with a lot of detail. It was sometimes throwing things against the wall and then having this huge community that would respond. Maybe I didn't do a good enough job continuing to cultivate that, and maybe the landscape just shifted. But I miss those conversations that we used to have in the comments, where I would learn from other people kind of reacting to and responding to the things that I had written. And I think that happens to some extent on Twitter, but obviously it's not nearly as long form, and so I don't think you get quite the level of insight.
Yeah, very interesting, because I actually started a blog in 2008 as well when I was 13. And I wrote, and I remember I only wrote for 2 months on this blog, but I remember getting comments from people and going through the comments. And I actually recently just checked out the website again on archive.org, and it's crazy to see who was commenting on the site. And, I know exactly what you're talking about. That's what I'm trying to say. And it was a different feel, but at the same time, I feel like that occurs on Twitter and as well as emails that I send out. Send out an email, I get replies, but it's not the same thing as that commenting that everyone can see. So, yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah, and I think the other aspect of it, just being honest, is I just do it with less frequency than I used to. And so I think that's part of it too. When I was in 2008, I had a lot less responsibilities that I have now with kids and a family and a much bigger job than I had then. And so I think I just also had more time to devote to it too. So that's probably part of it.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the family. One of the most interesting things to me is that you and your wife went on your first date as a run. And this always stuck out to me because it just, it's a little weird, but it's weird up my alley. And it's like something that I could think of myself doing. So talk to me about why you guys went on a run, and like, did you know after your first date that this is the one, or did you have that idea? Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I don't think I knew after the first date, but I would certainly say that within the first couple of months or so, I was pretty sure. Just a little background for you. So my wife was actually the class behind me in grad school. But to our knowledge, we don't know that we ever spoke to each other in grad school.
Wow.
Because she was the class below me, we just didn't share very many classes. I think maybe one class. And so at Aggie happy hours, at alumni happy hours, we would periodically see each other. And so I saw her. I thought she was beautiful and wanted to get to know her better. And, fast forward a year or two later, and I think she had posted on social about, training for a marathon or something. And I liked running shorter distances, and she was early in her training. And so the distances were still relatively short. And I think I, said something like, do you need a training partner or something? And she was like, yeah, if you want to keep up. And the competitive person in me was like, yeah, let's see about this. And so then I think we went on this, I showed up and we went on this run, and I think it was a 6 miler. And towards the end of it, I was like, I'm going to go ahead and sprint. And she just looked at me like I was an idiot. And I kicked and finished and beat her. And like, that's the competitive nature. And she was like, I don't know what the point of that was. That's not what I'm not training to do long distance. I'm training to do a marathon. And anyway, it was funny, but, we went on a couple of runs, and actually funny story. After our second or third run, she invited me to go have a beer, and my dad just happened to be having surgery that night. And I was like, no, I actually have to go check on my dad. And I got in the truck, and it turns out I didn't even have my wallet. So that would have been super embarrassing had she had to pay for my beer. And then I also joked that me turning her down for that beer probably increased her desire to want me. And that may not be true at all. And she's probably rolling her eyes listening to this one day. But I think that was kind of serendipitous and worked out in my favor too. I think I was inadvertently playing a little hard to get. So yeah, I think I told her after about a month and a half of dating in a bar that I was going to marry her, and we got engaged after 9 months, and here we are 7 years later with a couple of kids and enjoying life.
Wow. God bless, man. That's amazing. And it's a very cool story to me just to hear about how that came to be. And you are fairly public with your family in the sense of you share values that you have for your family. And that's something that someone who doesn't have a significant other or a family is thinking about it myself. And so I'm really curious about those values that you've created for your family and why.
Yeah. So, I don't know what I originally decided to do this for, but I started thinking about what mattered to me. And then obviously that shifts when you have a family. And so I started thinking about, what being a father meant to me, what our family values should be. And so my wife and I kind of sketched out what our quote unquote family commandments are. And I think I had read about Fred Wilson, the venture capitalist, having pretty regularly family meetings with his family. And I thought that was something we could aspire to when our kids got older. And so I said, let's create them. And then, obviously they're not going to have much input when they're 4 and 1. But as they get older, they can help us shape these, and we can have meetings, and some can fall off the list if we decide they're not as important, and we can add new ones and whatever that looks like. But I just think it's important to kind of have that North Star and things that keep us centered so that we don't get lost. I don't ever want us to become the family that's just sitting around watching TV and playing video games all the time. Not that those things are bad in moderation. But I think, one of ours is, that we want to opt outside, that nature soothes the soul. And a lot of these things, we put a lot of thought into, and the research shows that it's true. Or, we read accounts from people older than us that were, 65, 75, 80 that said, this is what we wish we would have done more of when we were younger. And so we kind of took all that into account and came up with our commandments. And some of them are, very much like the golden rule. Hey, just treat other people the way you want to be treated. And other ones are things that are important to my wife and I that are like, we want a fit family. We want to eat cleanly. We want to, live leanly. We want to train aggressively, things like that. We also are big on, less things and more time and more experiences. And that's one we navigate with the grandparents periodically because our kids are the first grandbabies on both sides. So they definitely inundate our kids with some toys. and we're grateful for that problem. But we also try to be like, hey, they need less things and more experiences. So this year we really encouraged like memberships to the local zoo, or a semester of soccer shots for our son, and so things like that. But we'll see how they play out. And the other thing I've been reading about is just how long-term little impact parents have. Well, with the respect to nurture, our genetics are going to matter a lot more when our kids are 25 than the things we did raising them now. But in the short term, we want them to have positive and happy experiences. And we know that, ultimately when they get a little bit older, those are things that they will take with them later in life too. And so, I think that a little bit to some extent might contradict what we're trying to accomplish, but I still think it's important nonetheless.
It's amazing, bro. And what I loved about what you said is that your kids are going to have input on the values themselves when they get older, because I was actually talking about this very issue on one of my previous episodes with Shelby Smith, and how we would want our children to be independent thinkers. And it sounds like, that's what you're trying to accomplish by having them have their own values. Is that kind of where your head's at?
Yeah, absolutely. I think society today, and especially K through 12 education, was really built and developed with the industrial age in mind. And now, with the industrial age more or less behind us and the knowledge work phase, I just think, education should look very different than it looks right now. We tell kids to sit down and be quiet and be still for 8 hours and learn these things that are not important, but there are many other things that are also important. And I think some of that is things like thinking independently. And I don't want my kids' politics or religion to be completely dictated by us. Obviously, we're going to have some influence on that. And that's just inevitable. And I think, most of the research shows that that's true. But I want to encourage them to explore their own thoughts and feelings. And, as long as they do it respectfully, I'm also happy with them when they get older pushing back and saying, hey, mom or dad, I actually feel differently than you on X, Y, and Z. And provided that, they have some rationale for that and they've thought through it, or we'll encourage that process, not just, hey, Billy told me, I shouldn't believe in the First Amendment or whatever. But, okay, well, let's walk through that and let's examine why it may be important or not to you. And that's something that we definitely want to cultivate in our kids.
Yeah. So could you talk to me about how you approach getting questions that are seemingly obvious, or questions that your children have that kind of throw you off? Have there ever been a situation, you said your kids are 1 and 4, where your kid asked you a question that was like, I don't know the answer to this, or like, this is a confusing question? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So, just to be completely candid, it probably depends on what's going on in that moment. Right. I think sometimes you just pat them on the head and, yeah, good question. But then other times, I think depending on the nature of the question, I may say, you know what, buddy, daddy doesn't know the answer to that. Let's go find some answers. And, we may get out the iPad or the computer and start looking it up and talk through them. And they're still a little bit young for that. Mm-hmm. But I want him to know that, hey, we don't always know the answers. Let's go see if we can get some more information. We can figure out a solution together. And so I think, that's a cool opportunity for both of us to learn, not only about whatever the question was, but about each other in that experience.
It's really cool because I think more than ever, this is one of my theories, that we're dealing in a society that is almost like the information is so accessible at a rate and a place that it's never been before, right? You just go online to Google, ask a question, all of a sudden the answer pops up. Think about how absurd that is, right? Like, people used to, back in the day, people used to have their whole salary for a month's worth of salary would be worth one book, right? And to think about now, we just press a few buttons and we get the answer right away. What are some of the challenges you're thinking about when raising a child in this type of environment? Do you have any idea of like when you're going to give your children a smartphone or a device? Like, have you thought that far out yet? Or is that kind of like a situation that, oh, we'll deal with that when it comes, when they're ready for it?
So I've only really thought about it because like a coworker may say something about, oh, you know, my daughter and their smartphone and they're like 11, you know, whatever. And I'm just like, I think part of it is you have to cross that bridge when you get there because you have to know your kid and their maturity level and things about them and things about their peers, et cetera. Mm-hmm. You know, and I don't want to be bullish and say, hey, this way or the highway. Because I just don't have all that information yet. If you were holding a gun to my head, I would say that I would prefer to not give my kids smartphones until at least 14 and probably not until they could drive. Mm-hmm. I was a little before smartphones, obviously, but I didn't get a phone until I could drive. If like my mom dropped me off somewhere, and of course nobody our age has house phones anymore, but if my parents dropped me off somewhere, they would hand me their cell phone and say, call the house when you're ready for us to come get you. I just don't know what utility a phone has for a kid that's not going somewhere where they need to communicate with me. And parents are always like, well, you don't understand. If all their friends have one, when they're 11, you'll give your kid one too. And I don't think that's true for my wife and I. I think, you know, we'll have to have that conversation and what the implications of it are. But I don't envision giving them that level of access until they're probably 14 or more. But we'll see. And we'll see what that looks like. And maybe there's opportunities where, you know, you get a burner and you can make phone calls or you can text, but you can't search the internet. And again, he's 4, so we're dealing with different.
No, I know this is some ways away.
You know, school changes and temper tantrums related to that and things like that versus the smartphone. But it's definitely something that I think is top of mind with parents. And I think the proliferation of social media and comparison culture is very dangerous with teenagers. Mm-hmm. And I think the data out there supports that.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I think we talk a lot, and my mind wants to go to the negatives of having social media at a young age. But from the positive perspective, because I don't think it gets a lot of talk, is like having access to social media at a young age. I was on Twitter probably in 8th or 9th grade, gave me the tools to navigate online and to make connections with people and to reach out. And maybe I would have figured that out eventually and figured out how to do that. But I feel like I got a competitive advantage almost in that I was using Twitter and writing online at such a young age because it allowed me to gain skills that I'm using to this day. And so I don't know if that's ever crossed your mind or anything like that, but just putting out the positive perspective.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. You're making me nostalgic because I was definitely designing like GeoCities websites when I was like 14, and you know that HTML has stayed with me forever.
Right.
And so, I definitely think there's merit to that, provided that you can. And my parents probably, as far as I know, they were not supervising anything I was doing online because I was, you know. I grew up with that culture and they didn't. Like I remember getting the huge computer that was no telling how expensive back in whenever that was, like 1996, you know, and you're like, it rolled around from room to room. And so, I learned a lot and I wrote early on. I think the other beautiful thing about, you know, using it early on, and you probably experienced you know, knowing a little bit about your background too, and your Knicks blog, for example, is just that you have this beautiful naivete where you're willing to try everything and you're less concerned with like how you come off because, hey, I'm just a kid. So you like yourself out there and you ask questions that might be perceived as stupid questions, but you can fall back on the fact that you're 13 or you're 14 or you're 15. And so I think you learn a ton as a result of putting yourself out there like that. And I think as we get older, one of the sad things is we're more reluctant to like put ourselves out there because we don't want to seem stupid. And so I really think, and one of the things, Danny, that I love that you do is with your experiments, they're very public. I call it working with the garage door open.
I love that.
And I think, I think I can't pronounce his last name and I've never heard it said, so I don't want to say it wrong, but I first heard it from Andy Matsichak, who was on David Perel's North Star blog. But I love this notion of like, and I'm trying to do more of it again because I did it when I was younger. And I just threw stuff against the wall and I got really amazing feedback and I learned from that experience. And I think I got to a certain point and I started having higher expectations for myself. And in doing that, I didn't put stuff out there as often unless it was more polished. And I think I'm missing out a little bit. And I kind of want to go back and retrain that muscle to like, put things out there that are a little more raw, to throw things against the wall and to let people comment on them and learn from that experience. And so that's one of the things I love that you're doing with your experiments is like, this is what I'm doing. I'm just sharing it with the world. If you guys want to chime in on it, you're welcome to. And so I think there's a lot of power in that.
Yeah, absolutely, brother. And thank you for the kind words. It's really just about not caring what other people think in the sense of not letting someone else's opinion dictate whether you're going to put something out there. But at the same time, wanting the feedback and wanting the perspectives. It's kind of like balancing two acts in that sense. And just being, like you said, raw and honest and being like, this is what I'm up to. And like, I'm just trying to do my best. And if you find a flaw or you find something that I could be doing better or you have a suggestion, I'd love to hear it. So it's like being confident in yourself and open-minded enough to change your path. Absolutely.
And the other thing I'll say on that point is real feedback is invaluable and it's really hard to come by in the world today. Obviously, you get feedback from trolls online, but like in the workplace, it is really hard to get real authentic feedback because people are worried about, especially if you're someone's boss, they're worried about the consequences of telling their boss that did something wrong. Or the boss is worried about giving his employees low ratings because then, they'll call HR on him or whatever that looks like. But I think the incentive structure for feedback is not very good in a lot of places. And I think if you find a handful of people and friends that you trust that will give you real authentic feedback when you're acting like an ass or you're doing something cool that's inspiring, either way, that they share that feedback to you, I think that's invaluable, and you need to keep those people as close as possible.
Do you think that is what you're talking about in the sense of people are scared to give feedback? Do you think that's a result of a culture shift? Do you think that just the way it is today? Was it always that way? Since you have a little more experience, I'd love to hear what you have to say on that.
I think there's a small element of it that may have been brought in by my generation, by the millennials, and like always getting a trophy and, things like that. I think there's some data that shows like there's a lot of grade inflation with my generation. But I think it's also about incentives. And I think there's some organizations out there that are working on how to do like anonymous 360 feedback and things like that, where you're getting enough data points to where you don't know who the person providing the feedback is. But I just think most people like it's uncomfortable to give it because you don't know how they'll react. It's uncomfortable to receive it because it doesn't make you feel good about yourself if it's negative. Mm-hmm. And so instead of embracing it and learning and growing from it, I think most people are content to just be comfortable and say, you know what, I'm going to take the easy path and just say, yeah, man, you're doing a good job. Because then you don't have to deal with any uncomfortableness or confrontation. And I think, somebody said, and I don't even remember who it is who to attribute to, but it says like success in life is directly proportionate to the number of uncomfortable conversations you're willing to have. I think there's a lot of truth to that. I think, people willing to have an uncomfortable conversation about a promotion or a raise, people willing to negotiate raises, like those things are uncomfortable and they're scary because somebody's giving you a job offer and you just want to say, yes, thank you, a job, I appreciate this. whereas you really should be negotiating for more money, and that's a little bit uncomfortable. But so I think there's it mostly stems from people not wanting to deal with that uncomfortableness.
It's so fascinating because you find this truth in fitness, you find this truth in reading, in that if you're willing to give yourself an uncomfortable situation for 45 minutes running or 45 minutes lifting weights, and then you're willing to give yourself, 30 minutes of reading a difficult book, you're going to gain from that situation. And if you can wrap your head around the idea that the uncomfortable is often the place where growth happens, then that makes the uncomfortable a little bit more comfortable. You know what I mean?
No, I think that's an excellent takeaway. I mean, you can almost go so far as to say that when you have two choices, you should typically choose the uncomfortable one. If you have if you start building that muscle, you will certainly grow faster than someone who is choosing the easy path every time.
Yeah, man. And that's what doing 75 Hard, I'm doing this program with everyone on September 18th is like this program with working out twice a day and reading 10 pages of a book and taking a progress picture, drinking a gallon of water, and following a diet for 75 days. It's like from doing that program last year, it rewired my brain into thinking that way and thinking that the uncomfortable things, the things that I didn't want to do, were actually the things I was most proud of at the end of the day, at the end of the 75 days. And it's just a crazy way to think about the world because I wasn't brought up to think this way, but I ended up thinking that comfort was what I should aim for. And it's just the furthest thing from the truth.
I remember looking at 75 Hard and thinking, most of this sounds legit, but I don't want to work out. I don't have time to work out twice a day.
Yeah, I get it, man. I get it. I mean, you have a job and kids, but the thing is, you get it with a walk outside, a yoga session. It's recovery, It's not like every workout is lifting weights. I had a friend in San Diego who lifted weights for every single one of his 150 workouts on this program. I said, "Are you crazy? Like, what is wrong with you?" But yeah.
That's aggressive. I certainly, like everybody else, right? Depending on the amount of sleep, all of this stuff has to kind of be dialed in tandem. If I'm worried about something with my kids, or my sleep's dialed in or not dialed in, or something stressful at work, I'm much less likely to choose the uncomfortable path, right?
Yep.
And so I think that's important to note too, is like all of your systems kind of have to be operating in a high function so that you are capable of consistently choosing that uncomfortable path. Because otherwise, you do default back to the comfort, and I think that's okay. But yeah, I'm wired a little bit weird to kind of take it back to the original talking point in that I always wanted coaches to push me harder than they did, or teachers to push me harder than they did. And I think it just came from a function of I wanted to see what I was capable of. And I did have this innate drive to push myself a certain amount, but we just default back to comfort. And so, in college, like it's much easier to go have a beer with your buddies, and you should, like, that's part of the college experience. But I just wonder if I had that coach, that was really riding my ass, to get in some extra reps before and after practice, to come in on weekends, to hit the gym, XYZ, what I truly would have been capable of. And, I don't know that that's for everybody, but it's always something that interested me. And I one of my favorite films is Whiplash, with J.K. Simmons' character pushing Miles Teller basically to the brink. And then what Teller becomes capable of there in that last drum solo. And I just find that movie fascinating. And I think maybe, it would benefit most people to be pushed like that at least once in their life. I don't know if it's sustainable, but at least once in our lives. I just think about like Navy SEALs or guys that do these ultra marathons or whatever. I think once you do something like that once, you don't necessarily have to do that crazy thing again, but it makes everything else that you do feel much more attainable or easier to achieve.
Yeah, man. And not to compare 75 Hard to Navy SEAL training or anything like that, but it definitely rewired my brain in the sense of, oh, wow, I did this program. This is a difficult thing. I can do other difficult things as well. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Yeah. I don't know if you've...
That's the mentality.
Yeah. I don't know if you've read Chasing Excellence by Ben Bergeron, but I think you'd get a lot of value out of it in terms of what you're talking about right now. Because it's a book about a CrossFit trainer and how he took the men's and women's champions in 2016 and coached them. And the mentality he used and the habits he had them form. And it really fascinating book that I read in like probably 24 hours on that retreat that I did. And just a really cool book that I think you would really enjoy.
I will definitely check it out. When you first recommended it to me, I definitely put it in the queue. I have 2 or 3 stacked up on the nightstand right now, but it is in the queue.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, it's just like for people like you and me, it's like you hear a book, you get another book from that book, you get another book, and all of a sudden it's like you're almost overwhelmed. Like, how am I ever going to finish these books? What I've realized is kind of like 75 Hard is you're not trying to finish. You're just trying to do the best you can today. And, you know, you might have a million recommendations that you might not get to in the future. That's fine. Just put your reading in today. Just do what you need to do today. Everything else will take care of itself.
Yeah, I'm a pretty voracious reader. And so it's actually like something that saddens me that like life is too short to read all the books that I want to read. So I've actually tried to get much better at kind of adopting some of like Naval's habits of reading, where if it's not interesting to me, I'll put it down. I might pick it back up once, but then if it doesn't grab my attention that time, I'm done with it. Or I'll flip through and find the parts that I think are applicable to what I'm trying to accomplish in life and extract that and take that away without having to read every word for word. And that's been that has been a big mind shift for me, because I've historically been this person that's like, I started it, I have to finish it. And so I've really tried to shift away from that.
Yeah. So going off that, and to ask a question that Tim Ferriss always asks, it's like, what's the book that you gift the most to other people?
Probably Meditations, Marcus Aurelius, just because I think it's such a great starting point to reframe your mentality. I mean, I just think it's the most powerful idea that, it's really what Ryan Holiday's The Obstacle is the Way is spun off of, is this mentality that life is not what happens to you, but how you respond. And I think to consistently be able to make that reframe in your daily interactions is just one of the most powerful things ever. So I give that one a lot. And the other one I gift a lot is When Breath Becomes Air by Paul, I'm going to say his name wrong, Calenthy, who was a physician who got a terminal cancer diagnosis. And I think reading that, if you're able to read that book and you don't want to take action in life, then I don't know what to tell you. Because it really makes you, it's a beautiful book, but it also just makes you realize that life is inherently really short, and tragedy can befall on anyone at any time. And so I think when you combine those ideas that life is short, tragedy can happen at any time, I need to make the best of every moment that I have on this life, and things are going to happen to me that are outside of my control, and therefore the way in which I respond to those is really what matters. I think between those two, you get a pretty powerful life philosophy.
Awesome. And those will be in the show notes at DannyMoreno.com/show notes. And so going back to Meditations was a book that I carried with me probably every day in my backpack for like 3 or 4 years. I just tore that book up in terms of notes and everything like that. So very close to my heart. The other book that you mentioned sounds a lot like the exercise that I really want to do but have never done, is walking through a cemetery. And it's just like, it seems like the type of thing that it really will give you life and spur you to action if you just realize and internalize that everyone dies, and it's just a fact of nature. But from that place, you can really hold on to the importance of what is, and you can really spur yourself to act and to make something of yourself and to achieve. Because if you're in that place where, you're going in and out of things and you don't know what exactly you're doing and you're kind of letting life take you, to do that is really important, and I highly recommend it.
Yeah, no, I think that's the perfect tie-in to what we were talking about earlier. I think as soon as you realize that you are going to die and you don't know when that day is going to be, it's time to start choosing that uncomfortable path.
I love what you did there. It's the truth. It's the truth there, brother. I mean, it's like, if you can get yourself to do the uncomfortable things, you can conquer anything, because the uncomfortable things are things that people don't want to do. 99 people are going to look at that and say, oh, I don't want to write. I don't want to record podcasts for years. I don't want to write blog posts. I don't want to do this. I don't want to do that. Well, if you are willing to do that, if you are willing to get better, you're in an incredible place.
Absolutely. I mean, without question. I think, too, when you talk about the uncomfortable things, one of the mental models that I use is, if the first order consequences are negative, but the second and the third order consequences are positive, then it's probably worth doing. So, that gives you a sense of lifting weights is hard, it's uncomfortable, but the second and third order effects are I get stronger, I'm healthier, I sleep better at night. There's 1,000 benefits to that. And so I think, generally speaking, the uncomfortable conversation is negative. It's very uncomfortable, but I got a $5,000 raise, which compounds over the life of my career, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's a good mental model that'll help people.
I love that. I'm going to use that for sure. And I try to use that every day, so it makes a lot of sense. So talk to me a little bit about why you put out content online. What's your motive for doing it? I'm really curious about how you think about this and how it's shifted over the years, if it has at all.
I think very early on when I started, the intent was to learn. More than anything, it was to learn. It was kind of to synthesize things I was reading and thinking about and put them in writing, because I think writing is one of the best ways to learn, which is why people like Jeff Bezos took away PowerPoints and told people to start writing memos, because it made them clarify their thinking. And so to me, just writing is one of the best ways to learn. And if I'm doing it for myself anyway, if someone else can learn from it, then that's just gravy. And so let's put it out there. But simultaneously, I kind of think of writing as my online resume, except it's much more robust than a resume, because it's going to show what I'm thinking about, but also how I think about things, what I'm curious about. It gives you insight into things that are important to me. And so it's a little bit of, instead of me having to proactively go out and create opportunities for myself, it's, here's the things I'm thinking about, here's the way in which I think, and now, I'm attracting people that are curious about that or think like that, and that really opens up a lot of opportunities.
I love that. I mean, sounds like exactly what I'm trying to do with this podcast, with my writing online, so I relate to that tremendously, brother.
I think that's awesome, man. I love the stuff you're putting out. I think a final point on that, I think there's a nice bit of accountability built into that. When you publicly share your thinking and your writing, I think, you're trying to refine these thoughts and you're trying to articulate them in a way that's easier for people to consume. And so I think there's a little bit of that social pressure, especially, to your point, once you got the newsletter going, there's an expectation that it's going to keep coming out. And so if you are writing, or, if you're reading or consuming and you're doing so because you want to create something, there's that level of accountability that's like, I have to keep leveling up the things I'm reading about and thinking about, because I need to learn new things so that I can share them with the world. And so, there's some built-in accountability of your own effort to level up, if you will.
Definitely. It's like so interesting, right? Because I put out this Tuesday Treasure newsletter, and then I think like the 9th week or something, one week I had ConvertKit, the email provider that I use, couldn't send out emails when I normally send them out at around noon on Tuesday, my time. And my friend texted me at like 3 o'clock, like, where's the treasure? And I was, so grateful to get that text. I was just like, well, I wrote it, but I can't send it out right now. But it makes me so happy to hear that you're looking forward to it, and you can. And he was in purpose serving as my form of accountability. So I know exactly what you're talking about, and super, super helpful to have.
That's a real testament to your Tuesday Treasure too, Danny. I think Seth Godin has a post a long time ago that was basically like, would people miss you if you were gone? If Seth stopped writing on the internet, a lot of people would be angry, right? Or sad. He probably, got to an age in which his cognitive decline or, is unable to post knowing Seth. But, that's thousands of people for Seth, and it, maybe 20 people for Danny Miranda and 15 people for Ryan Stevens. But it's truly powerful when people start to look forward to your content and they have that expectation of getting it, and they would miss it if it wasn't there. So that's awesome. That's a nice testament to your work.
Dude, I remember when Seth Godin I was starting blogging in like 2008 or whatever, and Seth Godin had been writing daily for, I don't know, it must have been like a few years at that point. And he's still doing it to this day. It's incredible. It shows his work ethic and consistency, and there's a reason why he's so good at what he does, right? And prolific. Oh my God.
Yeah, I mean, he is a force of nature, and he's amazing. And he's one of the handful of blogs that I, never miss a post.
Yeah, I mean, I think it might be just like you put in that work daily for so long, there's no other possibility for what to happen. And you start off with talent to begin with, a little bit of talent, and you put in that work daily for so long, it's just impossible for your work not to become must-read material,
Yeah, I mean,
what do you think about that? Like, do you think like what people should do is just go at it daily, or do you think that people should like play more of a long game? I guess it depends on your goals, but talk to me a little bit about your thinking in terms of that.
So as Ramit Sethi would tell you, the answer is both. He always says yes and. So the answer is both, I think. I think you don't need to necessarily publish daily, but I think, writing and thinking and reading should be all daily habits for the most part. I think the benefits are there. And I think plodding along in the right direction matters. And so I think as you write and you think and you publish, you're not always going to get it right. There's going to be some misses. Even Seth Godin has misses, at least from his vantage point, probably, right? But I think as long as you're like plodding along and you're going in the right direction, the speed doesn't matter as much. It's the direction that matters. And I think that likens itself back to good systems. You can have goals that you're going to accomplish X, Y, and Z. But if the system is, I'm going to create every day, or I'm going to write every day, or I'm going to read every day, the goal will more or less take care of itself. So I think I'm trying to cram too many ideas here into this answer. But
I love it.
But I do think, to your point, it's doing it daily is going to certainly benefit the long game. And in fact, let's take it a step further. You should try and do things daily and invest in things that will compound. And so people think about compound interest in terms of investing. If you're investing daily, the compound interest, it's going to be a lot of money when you get older. But we don't think enough about investing in other things like our relationships or our physical health or our writing or our reading or our thinking. If every day you're writing, you're reading, you're thinking, if every Tuesday you're putting out a Tuesday Treasure, think about how powerful it is and how good you're going to be at it 5 years from now.
That's all I think about, brother.
And so without question, the long game matters. But that's why our relationships, doing things for our relationships today, working out today, eating correctly today, it matters later in life. And I think a big misconception and a big problem people have when they're our age is, I don't have to worry about that, because what's the difference in dying at 85 versus 87? Whoop-de-doo, 2 years. Okay. That a lot of people think that way. And I think that's really dangerous, because it's not the 2 years that's a big deal. It's the fact that if you're not taking care of yourself now, from 75 to 85 is going to be really painful. You're going to be having health issues. People that you love and care about are going to see you in a depleted state. They're going to have to take care of you. You're going to be dependent on them. So I think it's not the 2 years of life at the end of your life that you're losing or getting. It's the 10 or 12 years towards the end of your life that you could be living with vitality and still doing things you want to do physically and cognitively instead of facing decline.
Dude, I love that point so much. And it reminds me of this book, 30 Lessons for Living by Carl Plummer, I believe his last name is.
I love that book, bro. It's so good. I read it so often.
Yes, I was really, that's amazing, because it really tied in so many of those ideas. And for those of you who don't know, it's a book, it'll be in the show notes, but it's a book about, it's a guy from Cornell, and he goes around and he asks people who are 65 plus, I believe is the age range. He asks them what they like, lessons for life, and treats them as if they are the elders and they are the people in our society we should be looking up to, because really they are. They have the most experience. They've seen the most. And so often, at least in American culture, we treat elders as like, oh, like they're just off on the side. Really, the young and vibrant people are who we should learn from, the cool upstart tech CEO. But it's the older people often who have so much more experience and wisdom. And this book perfectly distills it into 30 lessons. And I read it in the past 6 months, and I'll definitely revisit it in the future. Just one of those books that had so many tangible things that stuck with me in terms of just what you're talking about. And yeah, man, incredible book.
That book, I actually just recommended that book to Dan, the Fit founder, who I know you're talking to or have talked to recently as well. But that book has really opened up a conversation between my wife and I. We started a little late and we're a little older, but it opened up the conversation of, do we want to have another kid? Because basically you interview all these people late in life, and there's not one person at the end of their life that says, you know what, I wish I'd have had less kids. So yeah, it's hard, and yeah, you're sleep deprived, and there's tons of challenges, especially juggling kids and big careers and things like that. But it definitely opened up that conversation for us, because we said, like, these people are 80 plus and they're like, hey, nobody's ever said, I wish I'd have had less kids. So that, just as an example, that's one of the conversations that we started having after I read that book.
So cool, man. And it just shows, like, you read a book and you find practical insights that you never could have imagined before reading it. You know what I mean?
There's no telling how many of my tweets over the last calendar year are like extractions from that book. It's a lot.
I did a tweet thread of just that the lessons I gained from that book, and it's just so impactful. And yeah, I highly recommend everyone listening to check that out. Awesome, brother. So it's been an incredible conversation. Have learned so much from you. Is there any last words you have? Any last piece of wisdom you'd like to leave us with?
Now you just put me on the spot.
I know. I asked these open-ended questions, and go in whatever direction you may please.
I really don't think so. I think if I could just give anybody, one takeaway, it would be that you should try to approach life. And if you want to have a great life, you should focus your energy and be very intentional about doing things that matter to you. And you should spend the time, preferably if you're younger, but if not, there's no better time to start than right now, to figure out what the things are that matter to you and to focus your intention and your energy on those things and to ignore the rest. To be like the weird guys that we talked about at the beginning of this, don't worry about what other people think. Focus on the things that matter to you. Danny, I think that's one of the things you've clarified really recently in your life, is that your mission is kind of three-pillared in happiness, health, and wealth. And I think, once people figure out what those pillars are for them, they can focus their attention very intently there and, ignore and spend as little time as possible on other things. And I think that's how you really can transform your life really quickly.
I love it, brother. Thank you so much for joining me. And also, where could people find you on the interwebs?
Yes, so probably the easiest way to find me is Twitter at Ryan Stevens. I'm on there fairly often. My DMs are open if you have any questions. I write at ryanstevens.me. That's kind of some of my personal insights and book reviews and things like that. And then my wife and I are co-authors of a site called dialedinmen.com, where we provide a lot of advice and things that we want our son to learn.
So cool. Thank you so much, brother, for taking the time out today. And I'm super grateful for you, super grateful for your writing. And I look forward to having more conversations like this in the future.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Danny. I appreciate it.
That was my conversation with Ryan Stevens. If you enjoyed this episode, let me know on Twitter at HeyDannyMiranda, or feel free to leave a review on iTunes. That helps more people find the show. Thank you again for listening. I appreciate you listening to the final seconds, and I'll see you guys in the next one.